Hi, what's your name?
Priscilla.
You like Elvis Presley?
Welcome to the Filmcast review of Priscilla. Joining us today for a review, she is a writer whose writing has appeared at Bright Wall Dark Room and Nerdist. Lindsey Romain, welcome back to the Filmcast, Lindsey.
Hello. Thank you guys for having me here today. So excited to be here.
It's great to have you on. I'm going to read a plot summary of this movie from the internet. When teenager Priscilla Beaulieu meets Elvis Presley at a party, the man who's already a meteoric rock and roll superstar becomes someone entirely unexpected in private moments. A thrilling crush, an ally in loneliness, and a gentle best friend, end quote. I don't know if...
Didn't need to have those last qualifiers. You could have just said something unexpected, period, right? That feels like it could have been enough for a summation of the movie.
And it might have been truer to the tone of the film, perhaps. But anyway, obviously the major details of Priscilla Presley and Elvis Presley's life and marriage are well known. So we may refer to them during our pre-spoiler conversation, but we will try not to spoil how the film handles these things, and particularly how the film ends, until after the spoiler section. So those are the ground rules for today. All that said, Lindsey Romain, you have been a big fan of Sofia Coppola's work. And I thought before we get into Priscilla, you could just tell us a little bit about why you're such a big fan of her work and why it resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been a big fan since The Virgin Suicides came out, which is obviously her first film. And that was one of the first films I saw as like a young woman that really made me feel like cinema could be for me too, or at least like that kind of auteur cinema. I watched my male friends have that kind of reaction to like Seven and, Tarantino and stuff like that. And I like those films too, but this was like the first time I felt like my vision of the world was being captured in a way. I think Sophia's attention to detail, the way that the camera lingers on fabric and perfume bottles and just little things like that I think women see, not to be too like gender essentialist about it, but I do just think there's like, you carry that into your film watching. And so, so I think that was really profound for me as a young woman. And I think I've, always been really receptive to the things that she chooses to make films about too. Throughout her career, I think she's made some interesting choices. I don't love all of her films to the same level. I'd say my favorites are like Virgin Suicides, Marie Antoinette. I also really have a soft spot for The Bling Ring. I've always been interested in what she does. And I think we have so few female auteurs like this, really kind of, you can count them on a couple hands, unfortunately, the ones that get this kind of exposure and, talked about in film circles the same way. So she always just felt immediately like kind of my window into the conversations I like to have about movies, the types of things I like to see. So yeah, she's a very special filmmaker to me.
Wonderful. Well, we are currently in a very interesting cultural moment around Elvis. The Elvis biopic by Baz Luhrmann just came out last year, made almost $300 million worldwide, and was critically acclaimed, nominated for a bunch of awards. I was therefore extremely interested in this movie, Priscilla, because it's theoretically telling a similar story, but from a very different perspective. Let's talk about your overall thoughts on Priscilla. Lindsey Romain, what do you think of this movie?
Yeah, I really loved this movie. I think my expectations were a little low, maybe just from some of the muted conversations I had heard about it, prior to seeing it, which I try to tune that out when I watch something, but it's not always entirely possible. I kind of went in, hoping to like it, expecting the best, but maybe not having the biggest hopes for it. And I think that helped me a lot because I was really enchanted by this film. I felt sort of immediately tapped into its wavelength, probably in many ways for what I just discussed, that I think Sofia has this attention to detail that for me as a woman is almost like a magnet. Like I just was immediately tapped in. The film opens with like someone's like feet in carpet. And I was just like, there we go. That's the Sofia, that I know. And so, yeah, I was really kind of spellbound by it. I think it taps into what I think she does best, which is, I think it's been a while since we've had a film from hers that is like about a young woman experiencing the world kind of at a distance, being pulled through something a little bit against her will, and us kind of being the voyeurs of her life as she's a voyeur to her own life. So, I really really loved it. I think there's a lot to discuss. I think it feels like a slight film at first, and the more you think about it, the more it reveals itself to you, the more there is kind of under the surface. So yeah, I really thought it was a beautiful film.
Devindra Hardor, your overall thoughts on Priscilla?
Yeah, I really liked it as well, and I think I feel like Sofia Coppola is also perfectly situated to tell this story because, like you're saying, Lindsay, she has often done films about young women trapped in their circumstances. And for me, the first movie of hers that really hit was Lost in Translation, and I remember seeing that in theaters. That was during college, and just kind of being stunned by like, oh, you can make a movie like this that is just like a mood piece and a tone poem and two characters just kind of having a very, very intimate relationship with each other, even if it's not like a traditional thing. And I think this movie feels as interesting on that level. Obviously, it's like about a much more famous couple, but I think there's a lot going on here. I think Kaylee Spiney is incredible, just because the movie doesn't give us much into her what she's actually thinking, and that could be tough with some
Yeah.
actors, like where you cannot
She's
read.
not a character that like vocalizes her thoughts very often throughout the course of the film.
And to me, that feels just very, very normal for a teenager. Like, she is so young. And I think the thing about her performance is that she feels like a kid. She feels like a kid, and they put big adult hair on her. And even people comment on that in the movie. And I think that's all on purpose because this all started when she was 14. And yeah, she went down. She was there in Graceland when she was like 17, but still pretty young. And I think the movie really, really just makes that clear, like how she is a very young person in this role or in this situation. And Kaylee Spiney just really does a great job of either through her performance or through her face of just kind of evoking the sense of what she's feeling, even if the movie isn't very explicit about it. So yeah, I thought it was really fascinating. And the only other thing I'd have to say is like Jacob Elordi, who, first of all, one of those actors I watched him on the HBO show on what was it called, on Euphoria. He is perhaps one of the most like villainous like characters ever put on screen, right? So to have that guy be Elvis, I think is such a choice. I don't think I can quite remove the euphoria-ness of his, of just him being in this movie, but I also thought he did a great job. But he also portrays Elvis in a very similar way as like the hot guy and very popular guy that everybody wants to be around, but there is a darkness to him. And I think he really captures that really well too. So there's a lot going on in this movie. I do think we'll talk about the ending. I do feel like some aspects of it feel abrupt. I would have liked more. I would have liked maybe even a deeper window into how Priscilla's feeling or how people feel about her situation, because it's just people commenting on like, oh, she's kind of young, while he like suggests she goes up to his room and everybody knows what's going to happen. There's a weird thing where so many people are just helping this grown man court a 14-year-old, and I found that really, really fascinating and really disturbing. It was a sign of the times. Pretty much every rock star was kind of like doing stuff like this too, but it's still incredibly gross to watch it today. Yeah.
Jeff Kanata, you want to share with us your thoughts on Priscilla?
Just don't feel like
on.
it.
Moving on.
I mean, if I ask if I want to, you've never asked that before. I just thought, no, I would love to. And honestly, Dave, my thoughts on Priscilla are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
All right, let's hear it.
Watching these lives intertwine, the performances certainly shine, but the style and the glitz of the rooms and outfits means the real star's production design. I agree with Lindsay that the tactile nature of this movie is really what moved me most. I was just how sumptuous everything is. Give the Academy Award to costume design of this movie right now. Like, I think there's more costumes on these two actors in the span of this movie than your average film. There's tons of costume changes. All of the material that they're using is like, oh, look at that outfit. Oh my God. And so much of the storytelling is really done through that art direction, that production design, the sets, Graceland itself, but also just her apartment, where her house that her family came from, all of these places that they're in. And one of the things that I'm so surprised about with this movie is its scope, or sort of lack thereof. It is very contained and constrained. And I know that a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that they couldn't get the rights to Elvis songs. So there's no chance to show him actually performing. But whether that was imposed upon them, or that was a choice from the start, the notion of having this only be witnessing him in those quiet moments, almost there's I think one brief moment where he's sort of larger than life.
Mhm.
Everything else is him as a grounded human being through her eyes. And the whole movie takes place in rooms, in like small rooms. And you don't think of the rock star lifestyle as being that, right? You think of these sort of grandiose settings. And certainly, watching Baz Luhrmann's film this week, as I did for the first time, it's the opposite end of the spectrum, right?
Right.
Baz Luhrmann is telling this almost a fairy tale, almost not even a fairy tale, but like a larger than life animated movie, really, of things that could just impossibly large scale. And to see this on the other end of the spectrum of that, with this constraint, and storytelling wise is constrained as well, in that you talked, Devindra, about the ending being abrupt. I felt that too, but I think the start of the movie is abrupt as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you really have this timeline that is like, we just took a chunk of this person's life, this Priscilla person. We took a chunk of her life that ended up sort of defining her for millions of people around the world. But it's so beautiful how the movie really shows that all of us have these little windows of our lives that have beginnings, middles, and ends, and they're so brief. And for her, it was defining. For her, it was it changed the course of everything. But it still is just this small little subsection of a life. And I thought that was kind of the magic of this movie, is that it is small, it is constrained. It just starts, it just ends, and it's just like, here's this window of time, very brief in the grand structure of things, but it's everything anybody wants to know about this person, and there's so much of her life extends beyond those borders. But I thought the movie was lovely as well. I mean, it does feel it's just a sort of this intimate little time you spend with these two people, and yes, it's disturbing. Yes, it's you feel the difference in time in just not that long,
not that long.
Yeah. 60 years. So I think it's a beautiful vision into that time period. It's a beautiful vision into how someone can be, manipulated and controlled in very subtle ways. And I just thought it was a lovely sort of intimate portrait of this relationship with great performances. Yeah.
Jeff, it's cool that you checked out the Elvis movie. I'm curious,
I'd been meaning to watch it for so long, and just it is a long movie, and it's one of those ones where it's like, how do I carve out time now that it's not sort of a necessity to see it in a certain time period? It's like, it's just sitting there on Max, the one to watch for HBO, and I can watch it anytime, so I tend to watch it no time. That's how it works.
It is funny how that movie is very much Baz Luhrmann, at his maximalist extreme, and this movie is Sofia Coppola at her minimalist extreme too. Like, it's fascinating how they're reflections of the directors.
I feel like they're very much not necessarily intentionally, but in dialogue with each other, in the sense that Baz Luhrmann's movie is the popular conception of Elvis, right? Like, when you think of Elvis, many of the beats that he hits in that movie, it's what we think of that person. And the vision of that.
I feel like it's drawn so grandly that it's
mythology.
It's mythology.
Yeah.
It's the legend of him.
That's what I'm trying to say. But I agree. But whereas this is not the version of Elvis that most people think about, right? And and I just want to say, I want to start by saying, I think something like that is enormously valuable, because I think that in general in our society we tend to valorize our icons too much. We tend to think of them as perfect. And then what ends up happening a lot of times is when they make one tweet or say one thing that like isn't in line with what we believe, we take them down. And there's a lot of
Elvis's tweets are horrible. Though, if you've read any,
horrible.
They would have been. They would have been. He would have been problematic AF if he existed in the modern day.
I mean, people have been like, "How old is she?" They start saying it's like Seinfeld right now.
100%. And the movie doesn't shy away from addressing the fact that he was 10 years older than her and started courting her when she was 14 years old.
Mhm.
So I think that kind of stuff is very like the enterprise. I think the enterprise is very valuable of like saying like, hey, these people who we admired, who we looked up to, who are legends in our minds, it might have not have really been a picnic to like be with them, or they might have had certain toxic traits that like people don't talk about as much because it makes it less convenient to play his records when you have that stuff clanging around in your mind. So I really like support that. Which is why I was sad that I didn't love this movie more. I thought it was only... I admired so much of what the movie is trying to do. And a lot of what you guys have said is correct. And specifically, I think the performances are both excellent. This is really Jacob Elordi's year, by the way. He's also in Saltburn, that new movie that's coming out. It's the Elordi-sance.
Where he also plays a pretty asshole. So I feel like he's really carved out his
he knows
piece
his,
right now. Yeah,
he knows his lane. He knows his lane.
I'm cursed with this beautiful face. What do I do? Yeah.
And yeah, the woman who plays Priscilla, as you guys have said, Kaylee Spaney, the performance is excellent, but also like the physical transformation that occurred. Like if you compare what that character looks like at the end of the movie to what she looks like at the beginning, it's incredible. A lot of that is hair and makeup as well, so huge props to them. But I think the performance also shows that is somebody who has been through something. I wish that, as I've already alluded to, I think the movie doesn't give us that much insight into what she is thinking. It kind of gives us these snapshots of various moments in time.
Where we get a sense of what she wants.
We get a sense of what she wants. We get a sense of like the difficulties that she goes through. But it honestly feels a lot like the pacing of a regular musical biopic, just from a different perspective. And I say that using musical biopic in the pejorative sense, where it's just like
it's the Walk Hard B-side.
Exactly, we're intercepting them at like critical moments, but like we don't know what the in-between moments are. We don't know like all the stuff that led up to that. We don't know what's motivating a lot of the character.
I think the biggest problem in that regard is, I don't want to talk about the end too prematurely, but her decision to leave it seems to come completely out of the blue in the movie.
I feel
Obviously,
like there could have been
a lot
more.
You've seen a lot of acts that would lead up to it, but we don't have any insight that she has made a decision until it sort of has happened. And I think that's unfortunate because I feel like it would have benefited the audience to sort of be inside her decision process in that regard.
Yeah. And I think that decision process is something that eluded me for most of the film. I think I want to understand, like, why is she with this guy? Is it just she just loves him? Does she love the fame? Does she love the accoutrement of fame? Like, I wish I had more access to it. I wish I had not even access to it. I wish I had the raw materials with which to make my own interpretation. And I felt like I didn't get that. That said, Lindsey Romain, I'm curious, like, how you feel about that? Like, do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that was the point? Like, what was your reaction?
I was about to say, it's kind of interesting hearing you say that because I think maybe Priscilla would feel the same way. It's someone who is completely lacking agency in her life in the beginning. And I think remembering that she's 14 when this starts, like when I was 14, I was still playing with Barbie dolls, like that's a child, that's a young child. And I think, you don't, your personality isn't developed yet at that point. So when someone swoops in, and especially Elvis, I kept thinking how it was interesting that he almost treats her like a father. Like it's almost like a transferring of fatherly roles. He even tells her dad when he's gonna, try to woo her in, like, I'll put her in school. She'll have babysitters all day, basically. Like, I think
she's a pet, like the enclosed the dog that he gives her to you.
Exactly.
Like she's a pet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and I think because of that, I don't think she knows anything about the world. So I think by necessity, she doesn't have much to say because what does a 14-year-old have to say about a world that she's not even exposed to? She's so cloistered into this like house and so suffocated in many ways. So I think I don't disagree that I wish there had been maybe a little bit more at the end. You know, we see certain things that kind of hint at like why she's starting to feel a little bit more powerful and ready to leave. But I think, yeah, there could have been maybe just a little bit more of that. I would have liked maybe even just 10 minutes more
Yeah.
of the movie. But yeah, I think what's also really interesting about this film, that I think I knew going in, I knew Elvis had some of these tendencies, but I was really just kind of moved by what a great depiction of abuse this film was. And I
Mhm.
mean, a type of abuse that I think we are used to, the cinematic version of domestic abuse being hitting people, throwing things at them. And there's a little bit of that in here, but I think the manipulation that he gives her throughout the film, or that he, does to her throughout the film, is so subtle in ways. Like you can see the magic of this man, and you can also see how, all of this, I guess, him, what fame has done to him has made him a little bit of a monster, and he enacts some of that power on this powerless girl, this,
Mhm.
child. And yeah, I think what you guys were saying too about how the film is constantly reminding you how young she is, not just with, I mean, I think Jacob Elordi's height really plays an
He's
interesting
a
role
giant.
in this film.
Yeah.
He's giant. And I think, I don't know that was the, same height difference in real life, but I think it works so well in this film because he's always towering over her. He's really like, it's reminding you how young she is. I think she looks like a little girl playing dress up throughout the film. We see her in high school. We see all of these just little things that remind us that this is a kid going through all of these very mature things. So yeah, the abuse elements of it I found
Mhm.
really disturbing, and I felt like it was good to see that in a film like this, to remind you that it's not just
Mhm.
the big bombastic versions of
Right.
abuse all the
That
time.
it's subtle. It's subtle, and it can be an accumulation of
Yes.
little denials of decisions, or denials, or placing things in a certain way, or engineering things in a certain
Lack of
way.
Straight up
autonomy.
gaslighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
to provide-
completely
to provide, like,
controlling,
yeah.
controlling what she wears, controlling. I mean, there was one line that he says earlier on in the film that like sent a chill down my spine. It was when he was first leaving, like, her behind, when he was going to go back to the States, and he said to her, like, be the same when I get back, or
Yeah.
like be the same when
Yeah.
I see you again, stay the same. And she's 14 at that point, so he's asking her, always be this little girl for me,
Mhm.
because
It's
that's what I
almost
want.
his vision is like the way the world should be, should be
Yeah.
constructed. I do like that the movie also makes it very clear, like she is not the only one he's kind of doing this with, right?
Yeah.
He has the fan letters. We know that he's like seeing other women too, but just the enterprise of like what is up with that soldier and his wife just being like, oh, that's a cute little girl
Yeah.
at the diner. I'm just gonna
Yeah, that-
reel her in for
He'd
Elvis.
like that.
And they do this. They
That
do
was
this everywhere.
really-
Clearly.
Yeah.
I also
That's
found
weird.
myself, as a father, I also found myself thinking about
Uh-huh.
Priscilla's parents and their
So
predicament, because I don't think it's as, I mean, I would love to say that you just go, no, but I don't think it's that simple. I think
Can't tell a
that
teenager no,
yeah,
unfortunately.
you can't tell a teenager no if you want to,
Well, if it's literally one of the most famous people on the
Yes.
planet
Yes.
wants to date them, like,
my
what do you-
God, what a situation to be put in,
and they would never forgive you. Like, they would never forgive you.
Exactly.
If you
Well,
said,
I think
and-
even more than that, I think it's protection, right? It's like especially back, then
Yep.
being married is an economic thing as much as it is, a romantic one. And I think that's probably on their mind too, right?
Yeah, and you see them, at least in the context of this movie, I don't know how accurate it is, but you see them, try to do somewhat of their due diligence to try to like ensure that this isn't a
Right.
horrible situation. And of course it is a horrible situation, but I don't know. I found myself sympathizing with their predicament, because it's just like a no-win situation, right?
Yeah, totally. All right, folks. A few more things to discuss. Let's get to spoilers for Elvis. I'm sorry, spoilers for Priscilla, the movie, starting right now. I want to talk about the end of the movie, but I want to make one clarification from earlier. Lindsay, I thought you made a good point about maybe this is an actually accurate depiction of Priscilla. And I just want to say I'm not necessarily expecting Priscilla to turn to camera and say what I was thinking in that moment was blank. You know, I'm not exactly expecting that, but there's like
Even though this movie is
Record
based
scratch. How do you think I got here?
you're probably wondering how I ended up
Yeah.
in this situation.
it is based on Priscilla Presley's book. Like
Yeah.
she was actively involved with the movie. Like there are
Yeah.
roots to like get more of that in there, but
I just
maybe
think
not
there's like there were so many moments where I wish I had not even access to her thoughts, just more access to like what happened in the situation. So like what is the daily life like of being a star? Like how does that change over time? We get a lot of it at the beginning where she's kind of waiting by the phone with her dog for most of the day. But then like how does it change over time? How does the fame impact her at all? Like I feel like we got very little of that. And so there's just stuff that I felt like, the movie narrows the aperture of what we're looking at in Elvis's life, and in this case, it's like focused squarely on Priscilla. And I felt like it narrowed it a little too much to the point where I felt like there's significantly more I wanted to know about this person's life. And maybe I'll look into it now because the book has the movie has piqued my interest. But I just wanted to clarify it wasn't like I'm looking for people to just say their thoughts. I'm just like I just want more of the interstitial stuff that happens. More like I remember there's one scene towards the end of the movie where this is right when she's about to like tell Elvis that she's leaving him, right? And she's hanging out with her friends, which I'm like, okay, don't know who those people are. Would love to know like how that happened because you know one of the big difficulties was she had trouble making friends. So it's like, okay, I guess she has friends now. And then it's like, hey, Elvis is really calling for you. And then she's like, oh yeah, he usually likes to do X before or after a gig, right? And that one like tossed off line, there's just a lot of intimacy when you know someone's daily movements like that. Like a lot of intimacy when you know their schedule and like can predict like what they need and when they need it. And I felt like we only got a glimpse of that. Like, and I really wanted more of like, what is that even like to be with him at this stage? That's what I was disappointed by. So basically, I like a lot of what the movie did, and I just wish I had more access or more information about what's going on between these characters.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I mentioned that I wish there was a little bit more at the end. I agree. Like I wanted more seeing her being a little independent, seeing her with her friends.
Right.
Like we get a little taste of that, but not, I didn't feel like quite enough to just really like place us in that perspective, see the growth. I do think it was a little.
We also don't know
brief.
what her leaving means for her.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like the fact that we just cut off in the car ride away, it means that we kind of have no idea what the ramifications of that decision are for her.
Yeah. Like
you know?
does her net worth change dramatically? Like like what is she vilified by the public? Like what happens?
Where is she going?
Where exactly? Where is she? What does she have to go to?
Yeah.
Her life has been completely him for the entire running time of this film, and so we don't even know what that decision means. We don't know. We don't know what the connotation of her decision is, and I think that's unfortunate because, like, I would love to know how difficult a decision that ended up being. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We get hints of it too, like when they're having the photo shoot, right? And she has to hand the kid off to the caretaker. There is that moment where it's Lisa Marie, right? So there's that moment where she is treating the caretaker like her mom, like the mother figure, and there is that loss of like, oh, I wish I was there, and not really much trapped here. And I think it's a lot of that. Like once she arrives, and then Priscilla starts to gain some set of independence. Like clearly, she wants to live a life with her child in a life of her own. That was kind of the feeling I was getting there.
I will say it was a nice kind of visual moment where when she's about to leave, we see the Graceland gates open up for the last time. And every single time we've seen those gates open up, there have been like people like taking pictures and standing there. And when she drives out, it's like she knows this is the final time she's going to drive out those gates. And I like that. It's kind of this thing that was set up like throughout the whole movie. Every like probably a dozen times we saw those gates with different people, and then the final time it's like there's a significance to it when she leaves, and I did really appreciate that. So
There's also something else notable about the scene when she leaves, I noticed, is when she's walking out the door, all the people saying goodbye to her are women. It's the women staff. There's
Mm.
no men. And we've seen her throughout the film completely surrounded by all of these dudes, right?
His
Yeah.
bros. He has so
Well,
many bros.
I love that he has an entourage basically,
Yeah.
right? And it's like the same guys.
Same
and
guys.
It's literally they could be the characters from Entourage, the
Yeah.
HBO original series.
At
right?
one point, they are lined up in height order. And it's just like Tweedledee to Tweedledum over here. It's just like shortest to highest. It's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we see her like kind of with these guys throughout the whole thing. So I thought it was really powerful that at the end, the
Mhm.
people that are like wishing her well as she goes off to the new stage are all the women staff who she was kind of kept from. Like we see scenes when,
Yeah.
you know,
She tries to
Elvis's
interact
dad,
with them. Yeah.
yeah, and then she's kind of shut down and not allowed to. So, you know, there's little visual cues like that, I think, that kind of fill in some of the work. But yeah, it's a little lacking on some of that detail. I do agree.
I do think it does a good job of kind of, the movie succeeds in its fundamental quest, which is portraying the atmosphere in which Priscilla existed as very oppressive, right? Like
Mhm.
that is, I think, one of the key missions of the movie, and I think it does a good job of that. Her world just feels so small throughout the course of the movie. The number of people she can interact with is really small. There's a great moment when she's about to be dropped off at school, and Elvis's dad says, "Remember, you can't invite anyone back to the house."
Yeah. No friends.
No friends. Which I just thought was like a very telling moment, and why it's, yeah, as we discussed, like why I missed any explanation of how she's able to have friends over time and like how that journey evolves. But
Yeah.
in terms of like the environment that she lives in, it's really feels very unpleasant.
Can we talk about her whole like graduation experience too? Like I think that's all kind of fascinating, like just how it's handled. Because everyone's like, "Oh yeah, you graduated high school, congratulations." Elvis is not dating a high schooler anymore. Like he's out of that thing. They spend the movie spends a lot of time building up to them having sex, you know, and them and he is rejecting it, which is very unusual for a situation like this, I'd say. So I think that is kind of fascinating and tells us about him as a character and how he saw her. And then we have a scenario where it's just like they're in bed together for like 2 or 3 days. And it's shown by, you know, the maid just delivering food in front of the door and her in various outfits. Very telling, right? It's just her dressed up the way Elvis wants in different, nothing real. You know, it's all just like sexy titillation for him, I guess. So that whole sequence was kind of fascinating to me.
I thought it was kind of a commentary on how someone like Elvis decides to compartmentalize components of his life. That's kind of how like. He's like, this person is in my life to serve this purpose.
Yes.
Yep.
And this person is in my life to serve this purpose, and they cannot grow beyond the bounds of that square that I've put them in, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like Tony Soprano, you know.
Yeah,
The Gumar is much different than
exactly.
you know, the
and
wife.
never the twain shall meet, or else
Yeah.
like it goes terribly, right?
Yeah.
I will say though, with Elvis, I think he sort of famously, this is not in the movie, but other women who have been his lovers have made it sound like he's not, you know, really up for that with them either. So I think he just had some kind of intimacy issues,
Or he
which,
didn't he didn't have like conventional, you know, penetrative sex the way that most people like. He preferred to acquire intimacy in other ways, probably. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what the movie points to.
Mhm.
But it also shows that can be like a very inconsiderate way to approach someone who you have basically trapped at your compound.
Yeah. She doesn't even have a
a
room of her own. She's always in his room, you know.
Yeah.
Well, and I think she wants to have sex with him. I mean,
Yeah.
that's also part of it.
She is
too,
a
that
horny teenager through much of the
which
movie.
I liked that it depicted that because it's like, yeah, she's almost like, what am I here for if it's not for this? And so I think that adds to some of her kind of internal confusion as well. Is just like, you know, I'm just your little doll, but you won't even show me intimacy. You won't even make me feel worthy of it. I thought that was conveyed really interestingly.
What did you guys think of this depiction of Elvis? I am curious because I think that I've seen some criticisms that it's like pretty one note. I would agree that it shows the nature of his manipulation to be like fairly complicated. And I also think that it reveals that it like the image we get from the movie is that it was largely an unpleasant experience to be married to him. I don't know how accurate that is. But I do
But
wonder,
also you
like,
get the sense from his perspective that he has room to feel like he's a good person, right? He's
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
that's the kind of the most nefarious part of it, is that from
There's a
his
self-deception.
perspective, from his perspective, he's a stand-up guy. Like, I talked to your dad, I made it all right. I'm constantly taking care of you. Like, I think that's one of the most interesting things about the movie is exactly what we were talking about earlier when Lindsey was saying earlier about the it's not just the thing you usually see in movies where like one person hits another person. It's like, well, there's a evil thing to do. This is much more subtle than that. And you can see from Elvis's perspective that he's perhaps hiding behind this notion of chivalry, that from his perspective is the best way I could possibly be, Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, Dave, but that's...
Oh, yeah, no. Well, I just think it's interesting because it's like a largely negative depiction of Elvis, right? If you watch Elvis, and I would say that was a largely positive depiction of Elvis and all the joy he brought to people's lives, and this is the opposite. I think it's fine that both exist, right? Like, because we have so much of the former already out there in the world, right?
I think Baz Luhrmann was vilifying the Colonel, right? His job was to make the Colonel the evil entity here. And we don't have the Colonel on the other end of some phone calls.
Yeah, we barely get any glimpse of him in this movie, right?
So,
This movie could not afford to bring Tom Hanks back to have that recurring role. There's a concert scene in this movie. They were on a stage. You just see the first row. You just see the first row of people, just like shadows in the back. It's like, you filled that concert hall.
I appreciated the ingenuity with which they got around, like, no Elvis songs and all the other constraints they had. Lindsey Romain, any thoughts on like this kind of version of Elvis? And do you think it's valuable? Do you think it's fair? Or any reactions to it?
Yeah, no, I think it's really valuable. I mean, I think for the purposes of this film too, right? Like, it has a whole different purpose than the Baz Luhrmann film. I think it's interesting too, even to see the like fanfare around the release of Elvis versus this film, just down to like the Presley family, loved the Elvis movie. And this one has been a little bit more like, Priscilla's done some press for it, but it's a little more under the radar with that. So like, obviously, there's maybe some contention there with this depiction of Elvis. But I think what you talked about, or what we talked about earlier in the film, or earlier in this conversation, I should say, but that we see earlier on in the film, is that this is just a guy. Like, the first time we see him, he's just at a party, sitting on a couch. There's no flashing lights. There's nothing to indicate that he's Elvis, like the superstar. It's just a person in a room. And I think that's really powerful for this story, because if we just saw him as this electric, larger than life person, I think it would diminish a little bit from what this is trying to tell us, which is that this is a guy who swept into this woman's life, who looks like someone, that you wouldn't see on the street. I mean, he's obviously still tall and handsome and Elvis, but it's more intimate. It just feels more real.
Yeah.
And throughout the whole film, I was kind of taken aback by that. And I mean, we do see flashes of happiness too. We see them at like pool parties and playing, go-karts and stuff. And that makes him feel real too, right? Like, just seeing him doing everyday activities. So I thought it worked really well for this. I was really impressed with Jacob Elordi too. I know we already said that, but just the like kind of quiet menace in him. I think it's really interesting if you've seen interviews and stuff too from him, like his preparation for the role versus Austin Butler's. He seems to be pretty relaxed about his whole depiction, which I think shows in the film. He seems comfortable in his skin. He just seems like this person versus like, I'm going to have this accent for the rest of my life.
He didn't have to sing, he didn't have to do his own song. So that's a big difference.
That's true.
It's true.
Not to, I think Austin Butler was great, but it is kind of funny how they approach these roles. I think even just shows up in the like physicality and everything.
I guess I asked the question because, as you indicated, there is disagreement within the Presley family about this depiction. So Priscilla Presley, on whose biopic this movie is based, my understanding is that she liked the movie, like she was supportive of the film. Lisa Marie Presley apparently wrote in a message to Sofia Coppola before this movie came out, quote, My father only comes across as a predator and manipulative. As his daughter, I don't read this and see any of my father in this character. I don't read this and see my mother's perspective of my father. I read this and see your shockingly vengeful and contemptuous perspective, and I don't understand why, end quote. So I just think it's interesting that like the family has such differing perspectives on this depiction. And I don't know if I completely agree with Lisa Marie Presley's assessment of
her perspective is it's hard because she's the daughter, right? Like you.
Right. Well, I'm saying I don't even know. I don't even know if I agree that obviously she can.
Yeah, I don't agree with her.
But I'm saying I don't know that I feel that is the only version of Elvis that we get in the movie. It's close to that. It's close to that. But I see a guy who is really struggling with like a lot of what's going on in his life and like
losing his mother, feeling alone.
And we see him as a victim of fame too.
Exactly.
I think
that's
like
100%.
He's not a nice person. He's not like he doesn't treat Priscilla well.
Right.
But I think it's not like I don't see him as like evil in any way. He's another human being that's struggling with the mantle that has been placed upon him. So
I mean, honestly, it's interesting to talk about this movie the week after we talked about Anatomy of a Fall, because I think it very much, that film's thesis statement, I think, is very pertinent to this one in that it's hard to sum up a marriage, even if you're showing a lot of it. You're not showing all of it, and you're not inside it. We're still, as much as we're inside Priscilla's experience in this movie, or at least the filmmakers are attempting that, we still don't get the whole picture. And, as I said, the movie is very limited in scope, and the constraint, I think, leaves out a lot of Elvis, right? Yeah. Because it's not his story, it's Priscilla's story. And we're only getting the moments he pops back into her life. But there's large swaths of time and big events that happen in his life that aren't in the purview of this movie at all.
It's so constrained, Jeff. Like when Elvis is off the tabloids are writing about it, we don't even know if that actually happened. Like all we get is Priscilla's knowledge and like what she has access to. So anyway, it's really fascinating, but I do think the movie is like certainly very compassionate to Priscilla, and I don't know that I see it as contemptuous of Elvis.
I mean, it's more if you've grown up only ever hearing the positive things about your superstar dad, it is very hard to have even like a hint of realism. It's like maybe he wasn't always the best guy. Maybe he was a little. There are stories about Elvis making out with 12-year-olds, and people remember that fondly. Like that 12-year-old has grown up to be like, oh yeah, that was awesome. But there are a lot of things that we could certainly discuss that are troubling, about this.
Also, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think it speaks to the different roles too that the Presley women play in like Elvis's legacy. Like Lisa Marie, and now that she's passed, Riley Keough, her daughter, are like kind of the arbiters of like his legacy. Like they own Graceland and like, are in control of his will and his finances and all of that. I think they are almost protecting the figurehead of Elvis versus the person. And I think, Priscilla doesn't have that same obligation really, so she can tell her story. And, Lisa Marie was a child when her dad died. She wasn't there through a lot of this or wouldn't have the memories of it. So it's like, she's valid in a sense of, that's her right to feel that way. But And
also, as you mentioned, she passed before having a chance to see the film. Right?
Yeah.
These are comments based on reading a screenplay, we assume.
That's right. Yeah.
Who knows if her feelings about the final film would be consistent,
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. All right, folks. Any other thoughts?
We got to talk about the ending.
I think
the ending is key. I mean,
Devindra, so tell us what happens at the end.
I mean, she's driving away to "I Will Always Love You," sung by Dolly Parton. I feel like there are layers of like what's going on there. But Lindsay, I think you had a lot of thoughts about this.
Well, I think it's one of those things that's not spelled out in the film, but if you know the history of that song, it was written by Dolly Parton, and Elvis was going to record the song until Dolly Parton realized that she would give up the rights and have, her name kind of taken away from this, wouldn't make money from it. And so she took it back for herself and decided to record it herself, and it was no longer an Elvis song. And is that not like kind of such a like perfect endpoint to this film of like a woman refinding her voice, reclaiming her voice and her power? And, I thought that was a really genius choice and just like the perfect way. I again, if you don't have that context, it might not feel quite as powerful, but I do still think even just the words in the song. Kind
Still
of
a great
convey.
song too. Like
Yeah.
the use of contemporary music and like music not from essentially that era, I think was really well done. Another thing Sofia Coppola is always very good at, just music selection in general. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this conversation about Priscilla. At the end of the day, it is really impressive that Sofia Coppola made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.